Wes Anderson is no longer just a director, he is an adjective. He is a shorthand for a certain style of movie. Pastel color, symmetry, quirky dialogue. These are all staples of a Wes Anderson movie. And as he's gotten more popular over the years, I think some people have mistaken who Wes Anderson is as a filmmaker. I constantly hear this argument against him. He is all style, no substance, which I think is a crazy thing to say about one of our most talented directors. And I think the reason it has come up is due to the memification of Wes Anderson. You've seen the AI videos of a Wes Anderson movie, whether it's a samurai movie, whether it's a Star Wars movie, whether it's just other types of franchise movies made in the style of Wes Anderson. This has become a phenomenon, especially after Asteroid City, and I think it's turned a lot of people off on Wes Anderson. Now, Wes Anderson is a filmmaker that people discover at different phases of their life. Maybe for someone, they discovered him in 1999 with Rushmore, his breakout. Maybe it's Royal Tenenbaums, the first time he was acknowledged by the Academy Awards. For me, that movie was in 2009, Fantastic Mr. Fox, being a kid of the 2000s. And then for a lot of people, I think their recognition into Wes Anderson was the Grand Budapest Hotel. That was a lot of people's introduction. That was the movie that got him a ton of Academy acclaim, and I think it's a lot of people's favorite movie of 2014. Everything since then has been a level of divisive. Island of Dogs certainly has its fans, and then it also has a lot of naysayers. Same with French Dispatch, and especially true with Asteroid City. However, today I want to make the argument of how Wes Anderson has evolved his craft and how he's actually doing some of the most substantive work he's done in his career, and the emotions are high in his movies right now. And I want to make this video clear. This is not saying Wes Anderson is somebody that has become a punching bag. He is still incredibly well respected within the film community, and I think a lot of real fans of film still love his movies. I think there is a contingency of fans on the internet that don't really engage and know what a Wes Anderson movie is. They see the trailer for a Wes Anderson movie and they see the memes and they think they get it. And they come away with this style over substance. Maybe they watch a movie like Asteroid City and think, there isn't much here in this movie. It doesn't remind me of Grand Budapest Hotel. It doesn't remind me of the stuff that I got introduced to in Wes Anderson. The thing that I love about Wes Anderson is how his visual style has evolved over the years, and especially the past decade. His visual aesthetic reveals emotional repression, nostalgia, and existential distress. This is something that I think he has grown with, especially in his last few films. Asteroid City being one of my favorite films from him, I think demonstrates this growth of a man struggling to deal with life and loss, and how those two things are so often interchangeable. However, this is something that he's always been dealing with in his career. For instance, let's look at Royal Tenenbaums, which is my favorite Wes Anderson film, which follows the dysfunction of the Tenenbaum family. And one of the big characters we follow in this film is Richie Tenenbaum, played by Luke Wilson. And there is an extremely iconic and upsetting scene in this movie where Richie Tenenbaum is about to kill himself, and you have Needle in the Hay by Elliott Smith playing. And there is a shot in here throughout where you just see the depression, the stagnation of this character's life, the triggering pain of it. He is able to reveal so much with emotional repression and nostalgia in this image. There is a loss of life and love scene within this character, and I think it's something that Wes Anderson has been able to do and evolve throughout his career. I think there are so many shots in Asteroid City that resemble this. One of the most iconic shots in this movie for me is when the character played by Jason Schwartzman steps out of the play and he's having a conversation with his character's wife, Margot Robbie, or the actress that plays his wife, I should say. And in this moment, you see so much of their relationship explained and the pain that this character is going through, trying to make something of his life and work through his pain. In Royal Tenenbaums, the emotion is far more stated due to the suicide attempt. In Asteroid City, you see a zombie trying to make it through his life, not knowing if he'll ever feel anything again. And I think it's such an emotionally resonant film for anyone who's lost anyone. And I find it such a beautiful scene in there. But we see this throughout his films. Even the animation, Fantastic Mr. Fox has a shot of Mr. Fox blankly staring in the mirror. And then it shows the identity crisis that these characters are facing. There is a final shot within the French Dispatch Dispatch, which is honestly a movie that I don't particularly care for myself, but they are all gathered while looking at the newspaper. And it's just the grief of loss in this moment, of a lost time in history. It's also the characters experiencing loss, losing the person who made this magazine possible. I think these are all really resonant themes, and it is something that I really love that Wes Anderson has been exploring later in his career. What it means to age and what it means to lose people you love, and how losing them can kind of just take you out of your art, but also makes you remember why you make art. That is something that Wes Anderson has done so well. He has become such a personable filmmaker, and he's exploring so much about himself. You can understand what Wes Anderson is going through his life, understanding what his characters are going through it, and how he has to essentially take his characters and use them almost as play dolls. And it gives them this aesthetic of a dollhouse where he is kind of mimicking what is going on, what he's working through. And it's very therapeutic for me while watching his movies. Another criticism of his that I find just quite baffling is the idea that he's making the same movie over and over again. And I think this is, again, the style of Wes Anderson. Somebody sees a trailer for the Phoenician Scheme and says, well, that looks like the French Dispatch, which also looks like Asteroid City, which also looks like Grand Budapest Hotel, which also looks like The Life Aquatic. He is never going to evolve out of this. And yes, he certainly has a certain artistic flair and style to us. If that is not your thing, you may never be able to fully engage in a Wes Anderson movie. However, to say that the stories themselves never evolve, I think is baffling. There is so much evolution within the films of Wes Anderson. One of my favorite ones to see is how his obsessive protagonist has grown. And let's focus it on one actor specifically in this, which is Jason Schwartzman, somebody who has been working with Anderson since 1999's Rushmore. And we last saw him in the film Asteroid City. Let's take the character of Max Fisher, played by Jason Schwartzman in Rushmore. And this is the first time that he and Wes Anderson worked together in 1999. And you see the young man in this movie. It is a coming-of-age movie of somebody who just doesn't really know how to navigate through life, and how he eventually finds a love that he can't really have and doesn't know what that means. In Asteroid City, we then follow the actor Jason Schwartzman basically 25 years later, and we see this character that he plays of Augie Steinbach, who is now suffering loss. This is a person in this film who is grieving the death of his wife and is now struggling to go through life, where the character of Max is so external about everything. You now see this actor of Jason Schwartzman so internal about everything and trying to make the best of a situation that he has no clue how to grapple. You are taking these two characters but having the same actor is very intentional, and it's something to see the evolution of those actors and also the growing stages of life, where Jason Schwartzman is when he's in his early 20s versus where Jason Schwartzman is in his 40s. And I think that's something that I just find beautiful about having the reoccurring actors in it. I think what people always mistake is you can have similar stories, but you can tell different avenues of those similar stories, which is something that Wes Anderson does exceptionally well. And one of the ones that I find so interesting that he seemingly always returns to is the motif of grief and absence. A lot of his films deal with being a father, whether that's Royal Tenenbaum, which is a father who is absent throughout his child's life, whether that is Life Aquatic, which is a father to a son that he doesn't know, whether it's Darjeeling Limited, which is dealing with the passing of a father, Grand Budapest, which is almost an adoptive father relationship, same with Moonrise Kingdom, and then we see it in Asteroid City, a father essentially learning how to grieve and make the best for his children in his own pain. And it is something that he explores throughout. These are the same ideas. These are films about grief and absence and fatherhood, but he tells them through different avenues. And that's something that I love about Wes Anderson, and I think that's what he does so well. So it drives me crazy when I hear this critique of Wes Anderson where it's he makes the same movie. He might have similar ideas and themes throughout these stories, but he is exploring them in different methods. So yes, while he explores fatherhood throughout all of his movies, I would say each film has a different understanding of a point of fatherhood. This next point is probably the one that drives me the most crazy when I hear people talking about Wes Anderson, which is saying he is an elitist. he is out of touch, that he is no longer connected to his humanity, and that he's only for hipsters of film students. And I think this one is just stupid. I don't know how else to say it, but the idea that Wes Anderson is an elitist, the idea that Wes Anderson is out of touch, I've just never really understood. Wes Anderson explores nostalgia, and yes, his films do typically explore his type of childhood interest, but to say that these movies are not about us and not about humanity, I just find incredibly wrong. His films are deeply human. They explore grief, they explore love, they explore failure, they explore connection, and often his films are quite political and engaged in the specific moment. Let's just take some of his less successful things. Darjeeling Limited, which is often cited as one of Wes Anderson's worst films, it's a film that I actually hold dear, is a film about three brothers having to deal with their father's death. And there are moments in this film, especially one within the train, where they are confronting themselves over it. And it is a story of reconciliation and healing through shared experiences. I think this is a very relatable story for a lot of families. Other films are specifically about the now. Grand Budapest Hotel, which I've already cited as I believe his most successful film, is a film about standing up to fascists. And I find it so wonderful how he juxtaposed the lighthearted tone within Grand Budapest Hotel with the dark undercurrent of Nazism that is creeping throughout. And it is such a juxtaposition of the dark comedic world that we all live in. The fact that both of these emotions can be true. The fact that, yes, people die and also people laugh at a funeral. That's something that I think Wes Anderson really understands about humanity, is if you want to be dour 24/7, that's just not an accurate way to portray people. People have complex emotions and complex humanity and also complex comedic sensibilities and when to make jokes. And I think that's something Wes Anderson has always done. And yet in all of his films, I do think he explores what it means for him to be an artist. No scene does it better than the balcony scene within Asteroid City, which I already mentioned, but this is a scene with Margot Robbie's character. In the film, she is essentially playing the actress who, in the making of this play, Asteroid City, she is the wife character to the Jason Schwartzman character, and they have this beautiful monologue, and it's this meta moment that explores what it means to grieve and also means what it is to interpret art and to feel art and to live art. I find it just such a downright beautiful moment within Asteroid City. And one of my favorite ones actually recently that I recommend to everybody is The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar. This is a movie that's on Netflix. This is an adaptation of a Roald Dahl story. And to be honest, the first time I watched it, and you can see it on my YouTube channel, I was not particularly high on this movie. I thought kind of the same thing a lot of people throw at critiques of Wes Anderson, where I'm like, you know what, this kind of feels derivative of what S. Anderson does throughout his career. And yet the second time that I watched this movie, I was really just blown away by this idea of this character of Henry Sugar, who is this character who learns how to access basically all the money in the world that he wants. And the exact second he accesses that, he just kind of is like blood on his hands. He doesn't want to have this type of wealth, and he decides to give it all away, and it becomes this material detachment and personal purpose. I found it surprisingly a moral story, and I also think it underlines where Wes Anderson feels about wealth and power and inequality, and the idea of having such power and having such influence and wealth and not giving it up to the people who need it most. Yes, his films again have a certain type of story, and there is a detachment to the emotion. Often that detachment actually is the emotion, and that's a hard thing for people to grapple. But when you watch a film, usually when they are distant from the screen, it's because they are distanced from their own emotion, and there's usually a revelatory breakthrough through the characters. Some of them are very obviously stated, like the Ben Stiller character in Royal Tenenbaums. Others of them are just characters reflecting on the passing of time and death, like we see in French Dispatch. I think one of the reasons that Wes Anderson has become the target of so much online hate is because there has been a TikTokification, as I call it, of Wes Anderson's films, which means people aren't actually watching the films or understanding them. It is the death of media literacy that we are seeing throughout film. And I think what ends up happening is people don't understand the substance within it, and they only see the aesthetic, and they think the aesthetic is the same over and over again. And you see this throughout the TikToks. There is the TikTok phenomenon with Wes Anderson. We are seeing his films essentially parodied using other films. One of the famous one is Wes Anderson's Star Wars. And we see that they can mimic the framing. AI is able to generally understand how a Wes Anderson film is framed. What they don't understand is what's behind the frame. They don't understand what the characters are saying, what the moments are. They only understand an aesthetic. And I think that's what, for a lot of people, Wes Anderson has become an aesthetic. It's almost become so much of a lifestyle for some people. And I totally think that is fair. You can watch Wes Anderson and just love the aesthetic so much. You can love being in these like storybooks that he creates, these dioramas that he makes of his world. That is a lot of the fun of enjoying Wes Anderson. I don't think that's the only thing that you can enjoy from Wes Anderson, but I think a lot of people just see that as the only thing Wes Anderson does. It is the aesthetic core to the max, but they're often quite hollow. It's one of the reasons I don't really engage / ever cared about the Wes Anderson AI parodies, because yes, they can intimidate, but intimidate is not the same as connecting on human feelings, which I think Wes Anderson has done so well. One of the most upsetting moments in a Wes Anderson film in recent memory, and I'm going to cite Asteroid City yet again, is the moment where the characters yell, "You can't wake up if you don't fall asleep."
Can't wake up if you don't fall asleep. You can't wake up if you don't fall asleep. You can't wake up if you don't fall asleep. You can't wake up if you don't fall asleep.
And for a lot of people, this was a very disconnecting scene. It seemed very silly. And what I found so powerful about this scene is this is a scene talking about mourning and awakening to reality. It is essentially saying you cannot experience life without experiencing death, or vice versa. You can't experience death without experiencing life. And those two things are interchangeable, and it's also this tragedy and beauty of life. Life is going to throw terrible things at you. Life is going to be pain throughout. And yet there is still a beauty and a quality of life that you have to be able to attach and find. Beauty of Wes Anderson as a filmmaker is, I think, the older you get, the more you learn about it. This is a director that I've been seeing since I've been about 10 years old, and I take new layers to Fantastic Mr. Fox every time I see it. Same with Grand Budapest, same with Moonrise Kingdom, Darjeeling Limited, The Life Aquatic. All of these films are films that have grown on me, and I think they explore different moments of life and also explored Wes Anderson evolving as a human being and learning what it means to live, learning what it is to seek, and also learning to essentially open himself up in a way that he doesn't feel comfortable in. So there is this storybook quality to all of his movies. There is this diorama quality to them, and you see him retreating to those dioramas, and you see these worlds becoming more insular and then also more expanded on the film landscape of it. And I think that is a perfect understanding for how nostalgia works. Nostalgia, we often look to our past to, I think when nostalgia is successful, explain our current and future. I think what so many people see is they only think Wes Anderson stays in the past and that's all he cares about. In Asteroid City, he is exploring isolation, loneliness, which is interesting enough coming after a few years of COVID. In French Dispatch, he is learning and discussing newspaper and the fall of newspapers, and Isle of Dogs, which is a movie that I don't always care for, is talking about propaganda. Grand Budapest Hotel, fascism, like all of these elements are within these movies, and I think that is a level of beauty. And if you want to see that displayed, one of my favorite Wes Anderson's movies is Moonrise Kingdom, which is a movie that I think you could very much symbolize as his childhood, but also him just finding love and comfort and learning to connect and find family, and also learn what it means to be a family. It's something that Wes Anderson does throughout all of his films, and it's one of the reasons I think he is a great filmmaker. So I wanted to make this video to just kind of talk about my love for Wes Anderson and also talk about, I think, why so much of the critiques on Wes Anderson are just misguided. So thank you to everyone who watched this video. I have a Criterion Collection review coming out soon, and I may have another review depending on how time goes. But thank you all to everyone who watched, and make sure to subscribe to this channel for more.